All right, we'll say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning. Share to thank our Talmud Torah sponsor. Our Talmud Torah sponsor for our annual Talmud Torah sponsor for Daf Yomi, the Tilson Mishpacha, for dedicating all the Shimon Drashos this year as a zechus for besuros tovos for Am Yisroel. Our week of learning sponsors, Rabbi Aryeh Chana Richter, in memory of Rabbi Richter's dear grandmother Sarah Bas Shimon Zichron Livracha, whose shiva is currently being observed. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, her neshama will have an aliyah and the family in nechama. And Daf Yomi sponsor, the nishmas Irwin Kramer Zichron Livracha, who passed away yesterday, whose shiva is also being observed. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, his neshama will have an aliyah and his family in nechama. Also with that, let us begin. All right, we are going to be on runaway train today. Let's do this. Today's daf is Memhei 45. We are picking up on Daled Amud Beis. Literally again, 3 lines down from the top. So remember again, we left off in the middle of the story of Yoshua and the Malach. Right? The Malach appears to Yoshua, tells Yoshua, I'm here because of 2 reasons. Number 1, you went ahead and you failed to offer up the Tamid yesterday, the daily offering. And number 2, now it's at night, you should have been learning Torah, and instead you're going ahead and bitalta Talmud Torah. Okay, during the day you were fighting a war. You couldn't learn, but now you should be learning. Now you should be learning. And again, and Yoshua says, so for which one did you come? I'm sorry, just for a second. Right, for which one, right, what is the infraction for which you are coming? To which the Gemara says, Amrle atabasi. I came now for the Talmud Torah. I came now because you're not learning. So miyad, so what happened? Vayalin Yoshua balayla hu b'socha eibeh. Yoshua, literally, Pasuk says, Yoshua slept literally that night in the valley. What does that mean? He slept in the valley of halacha, meaning Yoshua said, Chevra, take out your svarim, Chevra, take out your gemaras. We're starting to learn now. The Malach is here because we're not learning. Everybody, let's get to work. I'm Rabbi Yochanan. What do you see from here? You see that Torah is even greater than the offering of karbanos. So both say, what a profound statement. Learning Torah is even greater. What does that mean? It means that the merit, the zechus that one accrues from learning Torah is even greater than offering karbanos, which by the way, just on a basic level, makes so much sense. Remember, offering up karbanos is something that someone else does for me. It's true, I have a chelik in it, it's important, right? But lamaisa, I'm not active. Torah is something that I'm actively engaged in. Shene'emar atabasi. So what also really just a profound Gemara that we have the opportunity to engage in something that's even greater than the offering of karbanos. So the Gemara goes right there. What do they do with this pasuk in Eretz Yisrael? The following pasuk: don't be quick to fight. What will you do in the end when your friend humiliates you? Rivcha, riv, esre'echa, have an argument with your friend if you need to. V'sod acher al tagil, but don't reveal the secrets of the other. So what does this mean? B'shash amar l'Akadosh Baruch Hu li'Yechezkel, lech emor lehem li'Yisrael. When Akadosh Baruch Hu was upset with Klal Yisrael, so he says to Yechezkel, go and say the following thing to Klal Yisrael. Go and tell them, avicha ha'amori v'imecha chitis. So this is actually pretty intense over here. Go and tell them, your father is an Amorite, and your mother is a Hittite. Now this is a reference to the fact that Avram and Sarah came from the Gentile nations. Hashem is like upset with Klal Yisrael, so he says, go tell them that you're right, your father is a Hittite and your mother is an Amorite. So the Gemara says, Amar Ruach Paskonis L'Nechlesh Baruch Hu. So a Ruach Paskonis, so literally again a spirit. Now Rashi points out this was the Malach Gavriel. The Malach Gavriel says, before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono Shel Olam Yavo Avram v'Sara v'Yamdu L'Fanecha Ata Omer La'hem Machlim Osam. So Gavriel gives HaKadosh Baruch Hu Musar. He says, Ribono Shel Olam, if Avram and Sarah were here, would you say this? Right? Would you go ahead and say such a thing about them? You'd go ahead and embarrass them? Rivcha riv esreacha v'sodacher lo salyo. So Gavriel literally says this pasuk to Hashem. He says, "Ribono shel olam, listen, fight with whoever you need to fight with, but don't reveal the secrets of others." Umi islei reshusei kol hai. But does Gavriel have the right to speak to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this way? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina, shalosh shemos yeshlo. Gavriel has 3 names: Piskin, Itmun, and Sigron. Piskin, Sheposik Dvar Klabi Mala. So Piskin, because again, literally, he measures his words towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, that he's able to seek to Hashem in a stark way. Itmon, She'otim Avonosim She'Yisrael. Itmon is that he shuts out the Averis of Klal Yisrael. Sigron, Kevan She'Sagar, Soger Shuv Eina Poseach. Once Gabriel says the conversation is over, the conversation is over. Incredible. So the Gemara says this: Haya'aroch Shuach Lo Batzar. Amar Rabbi Lazar, the old supposed to say, this pasuk is from Eov. This pasuk is from Eov. Now, literally translated over here, what's happened is Eov's friends, there's this interesting conversation after Eov is suffering. So there's all these interesting conversations between Eov and his friends, where his friends are trying to figure out the root of his suffering, right? Why is he suffering so much? So they say to Eov, had you davened, would you not have been saved from this calamity? Rabbi Lazar, the Olam Yaktim Adam Tefillah L'Tzara. Love says a profound Gemara. A person should always daven before the suffering occurs. Daven proactively. Shilmale lo hektim Avram L'Tefillah L'Tzara bein Beis El ubein Ha'ai lo nishtayir merishe Yisrael Surid upalit. Had Adam Avinu not proactively davened in the area between Beit El and Ai, Klal Yisrael would not have been saved. That refers to, remember again, that's the war. So these stories connect back together. Remember again, how do we get started with this? Achan went ahead and took from the spoils of Yericho when he wasn't allowed to. How did Yoshua know that something was up? Because 36 men were killed in the battle of Ai. They were killed in the battle of Ai. Now, again, that's how Yoshua realized why are we losing soldiers? It doesn't make any sense. That's when they realized that someone committed an Aveira. So the idea over here is also that why only 30? Now, Baruch Hashem, it was quote unquote only 36. Now, every year, of course, is precious. No such thing as only, but the casualties could have been much worse. So the Gemara attributes the minimized casualties to the proactive tefillos of Avram Avinu. So the Gemara says, it's actually here the Gemara is also introducing us to a different dynamic of tefillah, which is proactive prayer. We're very used to the concept of reactive prayer. Something's wrong, I need something, there's crisis, I daven, which is incredibly profound as well. Now the Gemara says it's the concept of proactive prayer. And in proactive prayer, the avoda is, while things are calm, while things are good, recognize that things can and do change so quickly. Daven to the Ribono Shel Olam to be a proactive, stabilizing force so that things should not go off the rails. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Avram Avinu davens proactively again for his children. A beautiful insight into tefillah. Rish Lakish says, Kol ha'ameis asmo b'tefillah milamata in tsarim milamala. So literally translated, Rashi says over here, Kol ha'ameis asmo b'tefillah milamata in tsarim yichol masim la. Anyone who davens with intensity here in this world, so the celestial, so that no negative forces or prosecutorial forces in the heavens have the ability to act against him. Rabbi Yochanan says, the Olim Yivakish Adam Rachamim, Shehu HaKol Ma'amtzin Es Kocho. I'm sorry. The Olim Yivakish Adam Rachamim, Shehu HaKol Ma'amtzin Es Kocho, Va'al Yuhu Lo Tsarim Milamala. So this is a very beautiful Gemara. The Gemara says as follows, that Rabbi Yochanan says a person should always ask compassion. If you look at Rashi, Shehu HaKol Ma'amtzin Es Kocho, Shehu Malachi Asharis, Levakish Rachamim, V'shelo Yehu Lo Mastinim Milamala. V'hachi Mashma. So it says beautiful. A person should always ask, when they daven, a person should say, I should have siyata d'shmaya in the celestial sphere. The malachim should help me, and the malachim should chas v'shalom not work against me. So the Gemaras like this in general are quite, if you look at the Lashon of Rashi, Sheiseu Malachi Asharis Levakish Rachamim, the Malachim should help to ask for compassion for me. V'shelo Yehu Lo Mastinim Milamala. There should not be any prosecuting forces above. Bahani Mashma Hayarok Shuach in Basalach. So I say, in general, Gemaras like this are always quite interesting because this notion that Malachim help me, Malachim are against me, soliciting angelic assistance above. Is this appropriate? Is this not appropriate? So it happens to be part of a raging hashkafic debate about the roles of Malachim within our tefillos and things like that. But the point the Gemara is making over here is that a person should realize in any given moment there are so many different wheels that are turning. Ask for help. Ask for help. Right? Ask for assistance from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from the Malachim, Absolutely incredible. Beautiful. Minayin shekiper lo viduyav. So we'll say, so again, the Gemara says, turn around on him. Minayin shekiper lo viduyav. How do we know that vidui works? That when a person does vidui, a person confesses their averos, that vidui itself has a curative effect on the individual. Shneimar, vayomer lo Yoshua, ma'achartanu yakicha Hashem hayom. This is again by Achan. So Yoshua says to Achan, Achan, you've uprooted us today. Hashem will uproot you. Just as you have uprooted us, Hashem will uproot you today. So the Gemara says, Hayom hazeh ata achar, v'ata achar li'olam haba. So Hashem was telling, Yoshua was telling Achan, today you will be uprooted. In other words, in this world you'll be punished, but in the next world not. Uksiv, u'bnei zarach, zimri, ve'esan, ve'heman, ve'kilkol, v'darda, kulam chamisha. My kulam chamisha hein li'olam haba. All five of these individuals have a portion of the world to come. Ksiv Zimri, Uksiv Achan. So both say, so it says, it gives the name of a person as Zimri and Achan. Rabbi Shmuel Chadamar Achan Shmuel. One says his name was Achan. His real name was Achan. Shmuel Zimri. So why does the Navi call him Zimri? So the Gemara says, Sha'asa Maisa Zimri. Because he acted like Zimri. Now this goes back to yesterday's daf, that remember again, Achan committed many different averos. The Gemara says one of the things that the Gemara accuses him of was Nara Murasa, that he engaged in an immoral, adulterous relationship. The Gemara says others say V'chadamar Zimri Shmo. Others say no, his name was Zimri. V'lamanikra Shmo Achan. So why was he called Achan? She'ichein avonosehem shal Yisroel. Ultimately, again, because he caused the sins to wrap around Klal Yisrael like a snake. His sin ultimately enveloped all of Klal Yisrael. Incredible. So we'll say, so again, the power of Vidui. The power of Vidui. And I remember again, just to highlight this, the Rambam brings down, Kishi Yasa Tshuva, Rambam, Hilchos Tshuva, Halacha Aleph. The Rambam says, Kishi Yasa Tshuva v'yashav mechato, chayiv lihisvados. The first step in Tshuva is Vidui, is confession. Why is that the first step in Tshuva? So Rav Richter zechus that tells Rosh Yeshiva, it's a beautiful sefer in Hilchos Tshuva called Hirhurei Tshuva, and he writes in it, it's very simple. It's very simple. Because at the end of the day, before you confess it, it's not real. I commit an avera. If I don't confess it, it lives in my mind. And again, what happens over time is, over time, I'm able to somehow justify, right? I'm able to justify it. I'm able to go ahead and kind of rework it, remake it, retool it in my mind. And if, it depends how good you are. Sometimes I could justify it. If I'm really good, I could even make it into a mitzvah, right? And after enough time, I could even begin to think of myself as a tzaddik, So the power of confession is confession makes the sin real. I acknowledge the fact that I did something wrong. I acknowledge the fact that I broke something significant inside of me. And if I acknowledge it and I make it real, then I have the opportunity to fix it. If I don't do those things, I'm just never going to end up really fixing it. That's the power of vidui. So therefore, just the confession itself has a rehabilitative effect, right? Isn't that interesting? The Gemara over here is talking about the idea that vidui is mechaper. So if you think about that, confession atones. How does that make any sense? If I confess it, I didn't do anything, right? I just confessed it. It's not like I did anything else. It's not like I changed my life. It's not like I retooled the way that I live. But Elamai, what do you see? The act of having enough personal courage to be able to take a step back and say, I did something wrong, and to acknowledge it and to own it, that by itself is a huge and incredible step in personal growth. Even if I don't do anything, in other words, even if there's no actual, there has to be more follow-up. But even for argument's sake, if there's no more follow-up, that is still a tremendous accomplishment. Incredible Gemara. All right, so let's go weiter. So the Gemara says, remember again, so the Gemara said, so if you remember again, the end of the Mishnah was talking about this idea that what happens if a person doesn't know how to do vidui? A person doesn't know how to do vidui. So what happens? What's talacha? So a person should just say, Tehemi sasi kapara, right? My death should be a kapara. So then the Mishnah ended off, where was this Mishnah? The Mishnah ended off that Rabbi Yehuda says, If Reuven, we're calling Reuven, right? Reuven's the guy being let out to be executed. If Reuven knows that he is innocent, so Reuven could say, my death should be a kapara for all of my averas, except for this avera, because I didn't do it. So then the Chacham said back to Rabbi Yehuda, if that's the case, everyone's going to say that. Everyone's going to say that. Why? Right? Because every defendant is innocent. Every defendant is innocent. So says the Gemara. Good. Who cares? Let everybody say it. What does it matter to us? So let every guilty person who's being let out say, my death should be a kapara for every aver except this one, because I didn't do it. So what? What does it matter if he says it? Because it doesn't look right, right? At a certain point, it looks like you're casting aspersions on the judicial abilities of Beis Din, right? Because at the end of the day, if every single person is going to be executed says, I didn't do it, the optics are strange. V'ala Eidim, and on the Eidim as well. I will say, listen to this story. There was once a guy who was being let out to be executed. Amar, im yeshbi avon zelote misasi kapara l'chol avonosai. So listen to this statement this guy made. He's about to be executed, and he makes the following statement. If I committed this sin, if I committed this avera for which I'm being executed, my death should not be an atonement for any of my averas. Vim ein bi avon zeh. But if I don't have this avera, tehei misasi kapar l'chol avonosai, then ultimately again allow my death to be an atonement for all of my averas. So you hear this? If I did this avera, my death should atone for nothing. If I didn't do this avera, my death should atone for everything. Ubeizin v'chol yisrael menukin, and again, and listen to this, and this guy said, you know what? And I hereby, Beis Din just did their best. Beis Din did their best. So I don't hold them culpable for my death. However, v'ha'edim lo tehei lahem mechila liolam. But the witnesses should never be forgiven. Because again, what the guy's saying is like this. Obviously, the guy clearly thought he was right. So he's doing two things. Number one, he's saying, if I committed this avera, my death should atone for nothing. If I didn't commit this avera, my death should atone for everything. Number one. Number two, I don't hold Beis Din accountable, right? Beis Din, they're just doing their job. They're processing the information, nothing else for them to do. But the Eidim, they should never be fined forgiveness, not in this world and not in the next. So what happens? Now, the Chum heard this, and I will say, obviously, this was startling. This was very startling, right? Because the guy was literally willing to go ahead and say that if he committed this avera, his death should not be a kapara. Very startling. So now the Beis Din heard this. They didn't know what to do. So to bring it back to Beis Din and to retry the case, you can't do that because you already issued a verdict. So what has to happen? Execute him. And again, Beis Din did their best. Really, what's happening over here is the yoke is going to be suspended around the neck of the Eidim. So the Gemara says, Pshita. That's obvious. The Gemara says, Kol kamine, lo tzricha de kahadri b'hu sahadi. No, I will say, what happened over here? What happened over here is, so I will say, first of all, it's obvious. In other words, look, obviously it's a very shocking statement. But just because the guilty party makes that statement doesn't mean we're going to reverse the din. In other words, the din is the din. Okay, obviously, it's a pretty shocking and jarring statement, but Lamai says nothing else for us to do. The Gemara says, no, what happened over here? The witnesses wanted to recant. After hearing this, right, the witnesses wanted to recant. So as I say, the Gemara says, so who cares? There's a principle in Eidos. What's the principle in Eidos? One, no backsies. That's the principle. Once you give your testimony, that's it. You can't go ahead and retract afterwards. To which the Gemara says, they will say, what happened over here? The witnesses wanted to retract and they wanted to explain why they were retracting. So even though now maybe they have a rationale for why they were, we thought about it a little bit more. Again, I will say the halacha is, Kevan shehigid, once a person gives testimony, you can't go ahead and go back and modify that. That's the end. That's the end of the story. Even if they have good reason to go back and give a whole story, I give a whole maisa, a whole explanation, nevertheless, we don't go ahead and let them go back. I will say, happy to say the Gemara says, Kiyahu Maisa Debaya Michsa, like the story of tax collector. I'm gonna record it separately later on in Meretz Hashem. This is a overwhelming story that's brought down in Rashi. The reason why Rashi is 2 columns on this page is because that entire left-hand column is pretty much one Rashi. that goes from the top to the bottom. I'm going to record it later on in Meretz Hashem as a separate piece because it deserves its own time. But if I have any shot of finishing the daf today, we're going to save it for later on in Meretz Hashem. But it is a tremendous, tremendous story. All right, that's the end of that sugya. The power of vidui, the power of confession to go and effect atonement all by itself, tremendous. Says the Mishnah, continuing in the execution process. So now remember, they're leading him out. They're leading Reuven out to be executed. So now, both say, when they were 10 amos away, that's when the whole vidui, that's when the whole confession process occurred. Now they're dalet amos away. So what happens? Mafshitin also as begadav. So they tell him to take off his clothing. So the Gemara says, now the reason they're doing that is because, remember, a person who's unclothed is killed faster as a result of stoning. That's what we're going to see over here. This is not a degradation piece. This is just the opposite. This is in order to expedite the execution. So when they're 4 amos away, they tell them to undress. So the Gemara says, "Ish mechasan also milafanov, va'isha milafaneha mi'achareha div Rabbi Yehuda." So Rabbi Yehuda says like this: a man, they just had something, a little piece of clothing covering the front of his body, the makom milah, and for a woman, a small article of clothing to cover her front and her back. That's Rabbi Yehuda. So to preserve some monicum of tznius. So Chum the Chum say, Ha'ish niskal arum, beinan isha niskalas arum. The Chum disagree. The Chum say, no. The only din of stoning unclothed ultimately is by a man. A woman is, if a woman is going to be executed, she's always executed clothed. Okay, top of Memhei, 45. Here we go. Tan Rabbanan ish mechasan also parak acham milfanov. V'isha shnei prakim mei milfanah bein macharel b'vnei shekula every day. So Rabbi Yehuda holds, it was just on the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda holds that everyone is stoned unclothed. A man has one piece of clothing just covering his makom milah, right? And a woman has 2 articles of clothing covering her front and her back. This is Rabbi Yehuda. V'cham say ish niskal arum bein ish niskal saruma. Cham say no, a man is clothed naked and a woman is not. My time of the so obviously there's machlokes over here. What's at the root of the machlokes? So my time of the Rabbanon, what's the logic of the Rabbanon who say that only a man is stoned unclothed, but a woman is executed clothed? Amakra, the ragmu oso, Pasuk says they will stone him. My oso, what does oso mean? Ilema oso v'lo oso. If you want to say that the din of skila only applies to a man and doesn't apply to a woman, baksiv, ba'otzeisa sa'ish hahu, o sa'ish hahi. The pasuk explicitly says that they will take out the man or the woman for stoning. To which the Gemara says, "Elamai oso." Rather, what does oso mean? Oso below kasuso. What it means is that there's a special din of skila by a man that doesn't apply to a woman. What's the special din of skila that applies to a man, not by a woman? Ultimately, again, clothing. Clothing, that by a man is stoned unclothed and a woman is stoned with her clothing. The Gemara says, oso below kasuso, ha-osa bichsusa. Okay, so we'll say that's the Chachamim. That's the Malocha L'Maisa. Again, you go ahead and you stone a man without his clothing, a woman with her clothing. Rabbi Yehuda says, Oso below kisuso, lo shna ish, v'lo shna isha. Rabbi Yehuda says, no. Oso is a generic term that means what? Everyone is stoned without their clothing. Right, that's the halacha. So the Gemara says, it doesn't matter a man, it doesn't matter a woman. The Memra, they both say, now here's what's interesting. What's driving a lot of this? The name of the Gemara says, is this to imply Rabbanan chayshi lehir hura, Rabbi Yehuda lo chayshi lehir. Now, both say, now here's what's interesting. Even though what's happening over here is the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda are both darshaning psukim. Right? They're literally, again, it's just a question of how you're darshaning the pasuk. But the Gemara says, maybe there's something deeper over here. Maybe, right, the Chachamim are concerned, ultimately, again, the Chachamim are concerned that if you go out, especially by a woman, and stone her unclothed, there are other people present. So maybe, again, seeing a woman unclothed will go ahead and awaken certain inappropriate desires within a man. And therefore, that's what we're concerned over here. So the Rabbanon who are Rabbi Yehuda who is concerned for that. The Rabbanon who are concerned for that, therefore say a woman is always stoned clothed, right? And Rabbi Yehuda seems not to be concerned for that. Is that what's happening over here? The Gemara says, but yet we learned actually just the opposite. What was just the opposite? So this is by Sota, the Snan. Hakoin ochizidus. So remember again, the Sota is the woman who is suspected of adultery, and there's an entire process. She's brought before the Kohen. There's the entire mixture of waters. So we go ahead and give her to drink. We give her to drink from the waters. So as part of the process, the Kohen rips her clothing. Kohen rips her clothing. So Gemara says, "This not a Kohen oches bebigadal." The Kohen holds on to her clothing. Im nikru nikru. If they tear, they tear. Vim nifru niframu. Ad shemagala asliba v'sos asara. Until her heart is exposed, and they undo her hair. In other words, if her hair is braided, they undo the braids of her hair. Rabbi Huda says, supposed to say that's the Chachamim. Now, interestingly enough, what that means is, in the sota process, it is possible that a woman will be in some state of being unclothed, some state, and yet the Rabbanon allow it. Rabbi Huda says, "Im haya liba noah, lo haya megaleu." So Rabbi Huda says, if she was an attractive woman, we don't do this. We don't do this. Vim haya sara noah, lo haya sosro. Right? And ultimately, again, if her hair was attractive, we also don't undo it. So the Gemara says, what do you see from here? So the Gemara says, it sounds like from over here that Rabbi Huda is the one who is choshesh. Ultimately, again, that if a man sees this sota in some state of being unclothed, it's going to awaken desire within him, right? And the Rabbanon seem not to be concerned for that. So that directly contradicts what we just said over here in our sugya, right? Because in our sugya, the Rabbanon are saying a woman is always stoned with her clothing on. And Rabbi Huda holds that no, she's in a partial state of being unclothed. So what's going on? So Rabbi says, no. Hasam hainu time Shema teitze mi beis din zakah v'yizgaru ba pirchei kuhuna. Hacha ha-mekatla. So I said, this is incredible. The Gemara says, no. Here's the difference. The difference is, in the case of the sota, so what's going to happen? So she could come out of this innocent. If she comes out of this innocent, then it's interesting. The pirchei kuhuna. Who are the pirchei kuhuna? The young kohanim. The young kohanim now we're concerned that what's going to happen. She's going to emerge from Beis Din, right, innocent. That's good. And what's going to happen? The pirchei kuhuna are going to try to pursue her. Right? She comes out innocent. What are your plans for tonight? It's not that. So, not good also because she's a sota, right? So in other words, that doesn't work out well, right? So the mice again. So because ultimately, again, she could be found innocent, leaving the Beis Din, we're concerned about potential immorality if they saw her in this partial state of being unclothed. Here in our Mishnah, we're talking about a woman's going to be executed. So there's no concern about that. So the Gemara says, this is incredible. Well, maybe we should be concerned by skila, because if they see a woman in a partial state of being unclothed, so okay, fine. So then nothing's going to happen with this woman because she's about to be executed. Maybe it will awaken within them a desire to do immoral things with other women, or just immoral things in general. So it's an incredible Gemara. Amar Rabba Gemiri, Ein Yitzhar Sholet, Ella B'mi She'inov Ros. I'll say this is fascinating. Rabba says we have a tradition. What's the tradition? That the Yetzer Hara only takes hold of something that you see with your own eyes. In other words, what Rabba seems to be saying is like this. Seeing one person doesn't awaken a desire for immorality with someone else. Seeing a person awakens a desire for immorality with that person that you're seeing. It's not, essentially, what Rabbi is saying is, immorality is non-transferable, right? In other words, it applies to what you see, doesn't really transfer over to anything else, which is such a fascinating and incredible idea. So therefore, again, the concern over here is immorality with the sota. The concern over here, ultimately, again, is immorality, with this particular woman that they're seeing in a state of being unclothed. But if she's going to be executed, there's no further concern about that. Ein Yetzer Hara sholet ela b'mi she'inov ros. The Yetzer Hara only goes ahead and takes hold over something that you see with your own eyes. But essentially, if you don't see it, or if you're not seeing it, then there's not a Yetzer Hara for it. Tremendous. Amar Rava, Rabbi Yehuda, Kasha, Rabban, Lo Kasha. So again, Rava says, one second. You're only posing this as a contradiction to Rabbi Yehuda. It's also a contradiction in the positions of the Rabbanon. So the Gemara says, Rabban, Nami Lo Kasha. I'm sorry, Rabbi Yehuda Lo Kasha Kedeshanina. Okay, so we just answered out about Rabbi Yehuda. Rabban, Nami Lo Kasha. Amakra, V'nosru kavanashim, V'lo ta'asena kizimaschina. Hacha ein lecha yiser gadol mizeh. So ultimately, you're going to both say, so remember the pasuk says, with Rabbi Yehuda, it's two different things, right? With Rabbi Yehuda is going to say, all of this is done, the sota and by the execution, is in order to go ahead and give musr to other people. So at the end of the day, a person is not going to come to sin when they see a woman in the partial state of being unclothed, being executed. witnessing an execution in and of itself is one of the greatest forms of Musar. So the Gemara goes right to the Chitema, the Avid Beitarti. So maybe we should do both. Maybe we should go ahead and halacha l'maisa compromise from both ways, namely execution and also debasement through being unclothed. Amar Rav Nachman, Rav Aravua, Amar Kra, v'yahavta l're'acha kamocha, barer lo misa yafa. So we'll say this is incredible. So ultimately, again, the Gemara says no. Even when you have to execute someone, you have to be makbid on their dignity. If you makbid on their dignity, so we'll say, isn't this incredible? V'yahavta l're'acha kamocha. What is that? How does this manifest itself? Even when you execute someone, there is still a halacha v'yahavta l're'acha kamocha. Do you hear what this is? Do you understand what this is saying? If you're executing someone, I'll say, generally, it's good to know. If you're executing someone, what does that usually say about the person? Not good, right? Not good, right? Good people don't get into those kind of situations, right? There are a lot of situations in life that even good people get into. Generally, if you're being led out to the Beis Haskila, you're not a good person. Bepashtos. You've done something that is deserving of execution. And again, remember, even though we've seen the whole sugya, the Beis Din's been advocating for you, the system is advocating for you, yet no one could exonerate you. It pretty much means you're probably not a good guy. That's what it probably means. Yet, even for the Jew who's not a good guy, there's a halacha. What's the halacha? V'yahavta l're'acha kamocha. I have an obligation to love him like I love myself. Now, it manifests differently. How does it manifest? What it does manifest is minimize the pain and suffering or minimize the degradation that such a person is going to have in his execution. So again, in this case it'll be, according to the Rabbanon, for a woman, we're not going to execute her unclothed. That's what it means. Or for a man, we're going to execute him unclothed, but we're still going to cover the area of his milah. In other words, we're going to preserve his dignity, ultimately, again, to a degree. Even though such a person has engaged in such behaviors, we're still going to go ahead and preserve. So we'll say, if there's a mitzvah of the V'yahavta l're'acha kamocha by the person who is liable to a death penalty, then al achas kama v'kama, how much we have to love each other as well. And we'll say we get into such divisiveness and we get into such strife and such negativity within Klal Yisrael over what? Over hashkafic differences, different differences. We'll say at the end of the day, there is a profound obligation that we have to love each other. If I even have to love the person who is being led out to be executed, al achas kama v'kama, how much I have to love the Jew, no matter how different he or she is than me. Incredible Gemara. So Gemara says, Rav Nachman Tanaihi, maybe Rav Nachman's statement ultimately is machlokes tanoim, to which the Gemara said, lo, t'kol amma islud Rav Nachman. Everyone agrees with Rav Nachman. Everyone agrees. So we'll say, what are they arguing about? Mar savar bizyoni de inish adifale tfei minecha de gufei, umar savar necha de gufei adif me bizyoni. So we'll say, this is actually very profound. The Gemara says like this: everyone agrees with Rav Nachman, namely, v'yahavta l're'acha kamocha. Make sure that when if you have to execute someone, do so in a way which preserves their dignity. So we'll say, here's the shaila: what do people care about more? Do people care about physical pain? Right? In other words, if you give a person a trade-off between preserving their dignity and suffering less, which one will people choose? Will people choose the preservation of dignity with more physical pain or less physical pain, but the compromising of their own dignity? That's the machlokes. Because also remember again, what's the trade-off? The trade-off is like this. I can keep my clothing, right? So I preserve my dignity, but what? Skila is more painful. Or I could shed the clothing, right? So the dignity is gone, but there's going to be less physical pain. So I'll say, the Gemara suggests, this is so profound, which one, right? Which one do people prefer? So if you look at Rashi says over here, Bezyoni de'inish adiflei kolomar gadol be'ein of tfei minecha de gufei hilchach noach lo shetisakal belavusha v'tish halamos v'afagav de'iket sara de gufa. So I'll say, this is machlokes over here. This is machlokes. So with a person, right? Well, of course, in other words, we have, everyone agrees, Yatrecha kamocha. It's a machlokes in human nature, which is such a fascinating machlokes. You see from here, by the way, how important it is to never compromise the dignity of another person. Because sometimes I'd rather keep my dignity and suffer physical pain, rather than lose my dignity and be a little bit more comfortable. It is such an incredible yisod. We'll say so many halachas over here, not just of how to execute people, but how to treat people when they're alive. You have to love a yid no matter what. They disagree with you, they agree with you. You have to find a way to accept and to love every Jew, even if you vehemently disagree with them. Number one. Number two, this is why we have to be so careful about how we treat the dignity of another. Because you see from here, dignity is so important that some people would rather even suffer physically, but keep their dignity than to suffer less and lose their dignity. Incredible. Mishnah. Okay, now I'll say, so now, it's fascinating, by the way, these Mishnayos, literally, again, we're going through the journey. It's almost like, overwhelmingly, we're going through the journey. We're walking side by side with the accused. So what happens? Beis Haskila, haya gavoa shtei komos. So the Beis Haskila was 2 stories high. Because remember, again, the way Skila worked, as we saw before, we've already referenced it, is they would push a person off a high roof. If he would die, well, we'll see it now. So it was 2 stories high. So it's interesting about say we'll see this more in depth. One of the witnesses. So the way it would work is the accused would stand kind of like we'll call it perpendicular to the edge of the building, and he would be pushed by one of the witnesses. It's interesting. The witnesses have to do this, which makes a lot of sense, right? The witnesses have to carry out the execution. They would push him by his torso, by his hips. They push him by the side. And they'd push him off the roof. So the Gemara says, if it turns out that when he hits the ground, he falls right on his chest, they would turn him on his side. And ultimately, again, if he died as a result of impact, yatsa. In other words, you might have thought that in order to be yotzei skila, you have to throw a stone. You got to get a pebble. You got to get something in there. The Gemara says, no. If he dies from impact, that's skila also. Ve'imlav. What if he didn't die in impact? So again, remember, the first witness pushed him off. The second witness, hasheni notal sa'evin benosna alibo. The second one goes in and takes the stone and literally again puts it on his heart, which means throws it on the guy. Imeis bayatza. So again, if he dies from the first stone, then okay, the yotze v'imlav rigimasa b'chol Yisrael. Then again, more people get involved and begin to stone him. Shneimar yada edin tiyeba b'rishona la'misa v'yad kol ha'am ba'achrona. So we'll say fascinating. Good. Says the Gemara, Tana v'koma shalo hurricane shalosh. Now we'll say, remember again. Now it's true the Beis Haskila is 3 stories high. Plus, remember again, a person also stands at a certain height, which means that he's falling also from even a larger height. 1 second. Why do you need such a tall structure? So the Gemara says, after all, a pit has the ability to kill at a depth of 10 tfachim. 10 tfachim. Af kol kedei lahamis asar tfachim. So in general, the Gemara says that even a height of 10 tfachim, which actually seems to be a relatively low amount, but even a height of 10 tfachim has the ability to cause someone to die from impact. This is interesting. Well, so you're right. Could you die from a fall of 10 tfachim? You can. But chances are you won't, and you're just going to get very, very badly hurt. The idea, and that will cause pain. The idea over here is we want there to be a fall that is high enough that the probability is that a person's going to die on impact. That's what we want. That's what we want over here. So the Gemara says, therefore, halacha l'maisa v'yatach kamocha, barlo misayafa. Kill him in a way that minimizes the pain. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, so put him on a 10-story building. Right? Put him on a 10-story building, to which the Gemara says, no. The Gemara says, mishum d'minavel. No, because remember, the issue is if it's too high, then what will happen? The body will become intensely, mangled, right? Mangled. And again, that would be a lack of covet, ultimately, again, to the mace as well. So we find this middle area. So in general, how do we know that the accused, right, or not accused, that the guilty party is pushed off the building? Talmud Lomar Yaro. Pasuk says it's pushed off. I know this skill. How do we know that it's both pushing and stoning? How do we know that if halacha l'maisa, we went ahead and he died as a result of impact, that's your yotzei? Talmud lomar o yaro yirareh. Minayin shaf l'doros kain. How do you know that this is true not just for the desert, but also for future generations as well? Amar beis Talmud lomar sakol yisakel. Okay. Ve'emlav eid hasheni notal sa'avin. So the Gemara says, and if not, remember, if the guy doesn't die from impact, so the second witness comes along and takes the stone. Notel ba'tanya b'shem ben Elazar omer Evan Haisa Sham Masu Shnei Bnei Adam. The way he makes it sound like is like this. First witness comes along, and what does the first witness do? He's the pusher. And then again, if Ruvain doesn't die from impact, so second witness comes along, and goes ahead and takes the stone and throws the stone. So it sounds like the second witness is taking the stone all by himself. He says, 1 second, Ba'tanya, Evan Haisa Sham Masu Shnei Bnei Adam. Ultimately, again, there was a stone there, but the stone was so heavy that it can only be carried by two people. So it's not a one-person thing, it's a two-person thing. To which the Gemara says, V'nosna alibo, not la v'nosna alibo, imes ba yasa. U'tamech tikshi hi gufa, masu shnei b'nei adam. So the Gemara says, tikshi lecha hi gufa, masu shnei b'nei adam. So in reality, Abba says, listen to this. It was a heavy stone. It had to be lifted by both witnesses. Not la v'nosna alibo, ella the midli la bahadi chavi. So what would happen? Both witnesses would lift up the stone together. V'shadi lohu ihu kihechi detisi marzia. So what would happen? Both witnesses would lift it up together, but it would really be only one of them who would do the throwing. Right? Because we'll say, essentially Rashi points out to us something very interesting. If two people try to throw something, what ends up happening? It doesn't go in a defined direction because there's two different forces acting on it. Right? Lamaisa, again, if you look at Rashi, it's actually incredible. When two people try to throw something, the intended item doesn't go in the right direction because there's two forces acting on it. Well, so listen to how profound this is. So therefore, again, if Ruvain didn't die from impact, so what happens over here? So halacha l'maisa, again, the two of them together lift up the stone and they throw it down. But they lift it up together, but only aid number 2 throws it himself in order to go ahead and ensure that it's going in the right direction. I just want to point out a tremendous Musar Haskell on this, because there are life-affirming lessons even in execution. What do I mean by that? So I'll say, think about this in just a moment. In life, there are stones we have to lift, right? In life, there are things we have to accomplish. And a lot of times in life, in order to accomplish things, you need other people to assist you, right? And that's true, right? I need other people to help me lift. You should only rely on other people to a certain degree. At a certain point in time, you got to take ownership for getting the stone where it needs to get to. Too often in life, we rely on other people from beginning to end. Right? I want to accomplish, but I need this one for this, I need this one for that. We all need other people to assist. No one could live life without assistance. So you need other people to help you lift the stone of personalistic accomplishment. But at the end of the day, to get that stone where it needs to get to accomplish the things you need to do, it's got to be you and you alone. Other people can assist, but the execution, no pun intended, right? The execution of your life goals, the execution of the things you want to accomplish, own it, take it, direct it. It's got to be you and you alone. Tremendous. Life-affirming lessons, even in the midst of execution. So the Gemara goes weiter. Bimlo, rigimaso. So Vatanya, me'olam lo shana ba'adam. So the Gemara says, interestingly enough, the Gemara says, but yet again. So remember, the Gemara says, if that first stone didn't work, then all of Klal Yisrael gets involved. So the Gemara says, but Brisa says, it never happened. It never happened. Never happened that you had a person who didn't die either from impact, or at least from impact, and then initial stone after that. So the Gemara says something amazing. That time, Mika Amina David. So it doesn't mean that they did it. You're right. It doesn't mean that actually, again, they threw additional stones. That's not what it means. Rather, what it means is the Imitzrach Kamina. In other words, if it was needed, this is what would happen. In other words, here's the process, right? We're laying out the process. The process was that halacha l'maisa, again, first push him off. If he dies on impact, good. If he doesn't die on impact, then second witness comes along and throws down a big stone. And if none of that worked, then again, everyone else would engage in the stoning. Now, did that ever happen? That they needed Klal Yisrael to get involved in the stoning? No. But nevertheless, that's part of the process. Amar Mar, Evan Haisa, Vatanya, So let's listen to this. So now this is incredible. So the Mishnah made it sound like, again, there was a stone that was prepared for the second witness to throw if it was necessary. So it says the Gemara, we learn in the Brayso, Achas even sheniskal ba, va'achas eitz shenitla alav, ve'echad sai shenerag bo, ve'echad sudu shecharak bo, kula nikbaran imo. Both say this is fascinating. After a person was executed, anything used in the process of execution was buried along with the guilty party. So the Gemara says over here, the sword that was used to kill him, the tree that he was hanged on, the stone that was used for stoning, right? The rope that was used for strangulation, everything was buried with him. So we'll say, if that's the case, then how was there a stone ready there? No, what it means is one stone per customer. In other words, that Lamaisa, you're right, if they executed Ruvain, the stone they used for the execution was buried along with him. But Allah Lamaisa, then if there was another execution, they would prepare a second stone. So the Gemara says, Nikbar Imo, really? These items would be buried with him? After all, we learned about Tanya. Ein Nikbar Imo. We wouldn't bury these items with him. Now, we'll say, by the way, the logic for burial is why it makes a lot of sense. You don't really want the stone. You don't really want the stone that was used for execution around. Why? It's going to be a lack of kavod ames, because people are going to see this and, oh, that was the stone that they killed Reuven. Right? That's the tree that they hanged Shimon from. You don't want that. It's a lack of kavod. So the Gemara says, yeah, they buried the stone along with the individual, and then they prepare another one. The Gemara says, 1 second, they bury with him. That time we learn enik bar nimo, but we learned that we don't bury the item together with the mace. In other words, Dafka will say, you don't want to bury this with the mace. It's almost like such a degradation to the mace that a mace should be buried along with the very item he was executed with. The Gemara says, you're right. I'm not papa my imo betfisas. Right? No, it doesn't mean that we put it in the kever. Right? In other words, you're not actually putting the instrument for execution in the kever itself. What it means is you're burying it along in the same general area together with the mace. Amar Shmuel, nikta yada edim pater. Both is fascinating. So let's say again, Reuven is condemned to death, and before the execution was carried out, so the one of the witnesses lost the hand. So if he lost the hand, then halach l'maisa, Reuven gets off on a technicality. So the Gemara says, my time, right? So Pater, Reuben is Pater. My time, this is incredible. Why? Because it says the hands of the witnesses have to be on the defendant or the guilty party first. So therefore, if the witness doesn't have a hand, so Reuben goes free. Technicality. So if that's the case, you tell me what? That people without hands can't be witnesses? In other words, if somebody's an amputee, he doesn't have hands. So he can't go ahead and testify in a capital case. No, what it means is like this. We're talking about witnesses who did have hands at the beginning of the proceedings, and they found them guilty. So again, if they lost their hands before execution was carried out, then the accused or the guilty party gets off on a technicality. But if they didn't have hands from the beginning, the testimony is fine. So the Gemara says, "Meisvei kamakom sheidu shnayim v'yomer me'idin rabish ploni shneim rodin bebezdin ploni edav harizei harik." So let's listen to this. But here's the problem. The Gemara says, "What about the following situation? Witnesses show up in another basin, right? Witnesses show up and they testify about the following. We are here to testify that in so and so basin, Reuven was found guilty of killing Shimon, and so and so were his witnesses." So they're showing up in Beis Din, talking about Reuven being found guilty in a different Beis Din, and ultimately again, and so were the witnesses. Now, interestingly enough, how are they believed? Based on what we just said, the witnesses have to be the ones who go ahead and carry out the execution. They have to have the hands to carry out this. In this case, Reuven is going to be condemned based on testimony about different testimony that occurred in a different Beis Din. To which the Gemara says, no, Shmuel, Shmuel said, no, actually we're talking about over here is those second set of witnesses that show up, those are actually the original witnesses who testified that Reuven was guilty. So we'll say, now here's what's interesting about this entire discussion. What's fascinating about this is, this is quite a literal interpretation of the Pesukim, right? The Gemara is saying, V'yad ha'edin tiebo barishona literally means that what? The witnesses, their hands have to be on him first, right? It's the witnesses who push him off the side of the building by skila. And therefore the Gemara is literally saying, if one of the witnesses doesn't have hands, then what? Reuven goes free. So the Gemara says, that is a pretty literal interpretation of the pasuk. So is that how we operate? Is that how we operate, that we're literally going to require such a literal interpretation? So the Gemara says, sorry, lost the place. All right, mi ba'in across. The Gemara says, do we really need such a little interpretation? K'dichsiv v'hatanya most yumas hamakeh rotzeachu. In the elabah misak sulaba. So both say, so the pasuk says, if somebody kills someone else, halach you have to execute him. Now I only know that you have to execute him in the particular execution that the Torah highlights, right? Minayishim iyata yochol miso misak sulaba sha'ata misa b'chol misa sha'ata yochol miso. Both say first white line. How do I know? So let's say someone's chayiv skila. Someone's chayiv skila. Right? How do I know that if for some reason I can't administer skila, that I kill him any way that I can? In other words, that halacha l'maisa, even if you can't administer the particularly prescribed misa, that you execute him in a different way. Most yumas hamakim mikomakum. Paul says most you must execute him. So what do you see from here? What you see from here is that halacha l'maisa, even the Torah explicitly says something, there's some latitude with the interpretation. Right? So even the Torah says that Reuven is supposed to get skila. If you can't give skila, you can only give hereg, right? That you give him hereg. So you see from here that psukim don't have to be necessarily interpreted explicitly, literally. Shiny hasam da amekra most yumas. So that's not a good raya. That's different. Why? Because there's lashon of most yumas. There's a lashon of a pasuk, right? And the lashon of the pasuk ultimately is most yumas, which is a more general statement. The ligmar minei. So why don't you go ahead and learn out from this? Let this be the paradigm. Let this be the paradigm that even when the Torah says something explicitly, it doesn't. The explicivity doesn't necessarily have to be understood in a very narrow way. Right? That's the avodah. So says the Gemara. The ligmar minei mishum davi rotzech v'gol adam shnei ksuvim abayin ke'echad. Because in reality, rotzech and gol adam are both. Now, what's interesting about rotzech and gol adam, we're going to see these are both cases where the Torah hands down a very specific punishment, but then the Torah also gives you latitude in the implementation of that punishment. And I both say, now, just pause for just a second. What's Shnei Ksuvim Abayin Ke'echad? Shnei Ksuvim Abayin is a very important, I won't call it an exegetical principle, but a limud principle, which is as follows. When the Torah says something once, right, that means that once is to create a paradigm, to create a rule. When the Torah says the same thing twice, what is that coming to tell you? That these two situations are an exception to the rule. So watch this. So here we go. So the Gemara says, therefore, whenever the Torah says the same principle twice, that is to create an exception and not to create a rule. So watch this. The Gemara says, so we just said Rotzeach. What's the case of Rotzeach? Rotzeach, the Torah tells me that someone killed someone. Reuven killed Shimon. He's found guilty. What's the halacha? We have to kill him with skila. What if we can't give skila? Kill him however you can kill him. Right? So the Gemara says, Gol Adam, what's the case of Gol Adam? Gol Adam, yomis esarotzeach. So mitzvah b'Gol Adam. So we'll say, right? Reuven kills Shimon accidentally. B'shogeg. What is the punishment for accidental murder? What's the punishment? Gol Adam. You go to Galus, but there is an avenger of blood. Who is avenger of blood? Right? Who is that? That's a relative of the person who was killed. So the Gemara says, how do we know? Mitzvah b'Gol Adam. This is wild. How do we know that, let's say again, Shimon doesn't have any relatives, so therefore again there's no Gol Adam. Beis Din appoints a Gol Adam. Be so interesting to see who applies for that job, right? Beis Din goes ahead and appoints a Gol Adam. So I'll say, so ultimately again, so you see what do you see from here? Even though the Torah says that it's dafka the Gol Hadam who goes and executes, who's a relative, but yet if there's no relative, Beis Din appoints us. So we'll say, what do you see in these two cases? Even though the pasuk explicitly says something, we nevertheless we interpret it to be not necessarily literal. So the Torah says a person who kills someone else is killed by skila. Okay, if you can't do skila, do something else. A person who kills accidentally is liable to death at the hands of the Gol Adam. But if there's no Gol Adam, then what? Beis Din appoints it. So these are two instances where we don't interpret the pasuk literally. So we'll say, therefore, Shnei Ksuvim Abayin Ke'echad, two psukim, two instances teaching us the same thing, non-literal interpretation. But because it's stated twice, therefore that means what? These are the exceptions and not the rule. But everywhere else, what is the rule? Literal interpretation. Literal understanding. And therefore, once coming full circle, we now understand that what? Who pushes the guilty party off the roof by skila? Who does it? The witnesses. Yad Aidim Tiya B'Orei Shona. And therefore, If between the verdict and the pushing, one of the witnesses becomes an amputee, loses his hands, then what's the halacha? Reuven goes free on a technicality. He goes free on a technicality. Incredible. So says the Gemara, Amli Markashish Rav Chisda Rav Ashi, Milo Ba'inan Kraki Dichsiv. But do we not need the pasuk to be in? I will say, you know what? We're going to stop over here. By the way, excellent job. We'll say excellent job. Shkoyach. Okay, it would have been nice to get to the Mishnah. I will say you did fantastic. Right? We did it together, Baruch Hashem. We leaned into it. We accomplished it. We finished off the week literally on the same page, almost on the same page as the Klal Yisrael. I will say, what a week of learning Sanhedrin. Such a tremendous zechus. And halavai. I just want to point out one last piece. One of the most important yisodos in all of this. What do you take? I will say, if you think about it, it's like a shtickle downer learning these gemaras. Like what do you do with all these gemaras about execution? I will say, I always find when you learn about death, what death does is learning about death creates the most life-affirming lessons. These are tragic circumstances where someone's life is coming to an end. So I say what it has to really ingrain within us is that Baruch Hashem, if we're here, if we're living, if we're breathing, if Baruch Hashem, we are not Baruch Hashem subject to these inyanim, then it means we got to accomplish. We got to do. Every breath we have is tremendous gift from the Ribono Shel Olam, and we should just be open to maximize it. Let's say shkoyach, a good Shabbos. Could we get the microphone by next week? Could we get the microphone set up by next week? I do. I need it. It's and we have it.
I was looking.
Got to figure. I mean, we invest in this, so we got to figure out a way.